Good afternoon. It's Thursday, not Thursday, it's Sunday, March 14th, the fourth Sunday of Lent. And if these were ordinary times on this Sunday, we would have had lots of babies baptized in church because this is Mothering Sunday. It's also one of the Sundays in Lent, the only Sunday in Lent where you wear pink and you rejoice. It's Laudate or Gaudete, one of those Sundays. But what I want to talk about is what Mothering Sunday is in the UK and in other places is it's Mother's Day, but it's not so much it has become Mother's Day for our birth mothers or our adoptive mothers, but the origin of the custom was in visiting the mother church, the church where we were baptized. That gave us our birth into, the way of being Christian. In previous times, I mean, the entire atmosphere was Christian, and everybody kind of did the Christian things like Christmas and Easter and Mothering Day and all that sort of stuff. But things have changed drastically and significantly in all kinds of ways. I mean, certainly in the last 12 months, things have changed in ways we never imagined, but there have been more gradual changes that have occurred, and I want to kind of talk about that in relationship to baptism. We have over 100 baptisms. Either we've celebrated them already or they're still they're scheduled since the 4th of July. I mean, that's not that long ago. And we have lots of young people that come to us and want their babies baptized. I had a text message when I woke up this morning from a young couple that got married in our parish a few years ago. They want to get that baby baptized. The baby's due this week. And baptism in the past was certainly part of the Catholic Christian way of being. And, when people of my age were baptized, our parents were told that was the first thing they had to do, is get them baptized, because if they didn't get baptized and they died, they were going to go to limbo. And that was one of the crueler customs that developed in our church, this whole limbo business, and where babies couldn't be buried in consecrated ground, which meant they couldn't be buried in Catholic cemeteries. They had to be buried in places where the rest of their family wasn't going to be buried. I mean, it just was barbaric as far as I'm concerned. But it had to do with interpretation, how they interpreted the biblical text. I told the story in my homily today about the fact that I was baptizing a baby once since I've been with Maria Goretti, and the godfather was in the Navy, and he was stationed at Coronado, and I regaled him with the fact that, according to my mother, I was the first baby baptized back in 1945 in the new Catholic chapel at Coronado Naval Air Base, because my dad was a dentist in the Navy, and so sometime later he sent me a picture of that chapel. I have it in my condo here, and that was the beginning of my Catholic life. And the reason I was baptized was because my parents had been baptized and so on. And they lived with a certain interpretation of what it was to be a Catholic Christian. That interpretation was handed on to them. And it was handed on by people who had had interpretations handed on to them. Over the years, though, particularly in the last 300, 400 years, Christianity in general, but Catholicism in particular, because it is such a heavily, somewhat bureaucratic, organized international organization, became very set in the interpretation of things. There was a mindset that everything had been settled, everything was settled. And so we had 7 sacraments, and this is what made a sacrament, and these were the laws of the church, and these were the 10 commandments, and these were the teachings, and the catechisms were pretty much the same, and it was the notion that everything was settled. Well, I've said before many times that the First and Second World War should have been a wake-up call to Christians in Europe, where most of us, not all of us, but most of us have our origin. The First World War was fought among and between people who were Christian, as was the Second World War. So how did the interpretation of the gospel allow them, that they had received, that interpretation that they had received, allow them to become enemies in such violent and destructive ways? That should have been a major question, and it was to some, but certainly not to the bureaucratic leadership of the Christian churches in Europe. They had kind of refined or honed down the essentials of Catholic Christian life to a kind of a collection of personal morality that largely revolved around sex and marriage and those kinds of things, and they doubled down on that, and a whole lot of the rest of the teachings of Christ were considered they were marginalized. I mean, they were not relevant to contemporary life as it unfolded during the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, because this notion that the church had to compete with science became so prevalent, and so the church set itself up in opposition to the scientific academic community, the work, for instance, of Charles Darwin, among many others, Gregor Mendel, and I mean, many people knew that the essential structure of reality was not found in the book of Genesis, as many Catholics and Christians claimed and still claim today, that the essential structures of reality was an evolving, changing, disclosing process that is not finished. And that was very, very threatening to religion. And then when we had the massive immigration between Europe and the United States after the First World War and the Second World War, that kind of questioning was, again, not part of the church's structure. The church was busy trying to maintain and create the institutions in the United States that it had in Europe. And, that was why people kept the same languages that they brought with them from Europe. Many people thought they were going to be here temporarily and then they would go back to their homeland and so on. It was a new time, massive immigration, not like the massive immigration we're experiencing today, the tremendous movements of people from the African continent and Latin America and South America for political reasons. And again, I can't help but say that because we have relied, the Catholic Christian churches have relied on the interpretation of the biblical text primarily from the 16th and 17th century, that we have become increasingly irrelevant in the developed countries, if you want to call that, the first world countries, the countries that have a great deal of prosperity and control over everything else. But in the third world countries, again, that has to do with economics and prosperity and control and power and a whole lot of weaponry. That there's a disparity. It would be helpful today, I think, to have our Catholic Christian leaders recommit to intensive education of those who want to lead, and create open dialogues, conversations among and between Catholic and Christian people, and Jewish and Muslim, and certainly with all of those who claim to have no, or nones. They have no religious affiliation because they see no value in it. And in a way, I can't blame them. But we need to have, I think, those kinds of conversations. We need, as a church, Pope Francis keeps trying to do that, but he meets such opposition, particularly in this country to discuss the role of women. I mean, obviously, the women's role in society has changed drastically. I mean, the fact that women are the victims of violence in very cruel and crude ways is a terrible commentary on the efficacy or the importance of the Christian teaching, because Jesus certainly never endorsed any kind of violence towards women for any reason. That whole story about the woman caught in the very act of adultery is a clear condemnation of violence towards women. But Christian people, it's the headlines today. In London, a poor woman was taken and kidnapped and brutalized. And I mean, so we need to have those kinds of conversations, return to the biblical text and see, what didn't we hear? What didn't we listen to? What didn't we pay attention to that has merit to bear on today? There's a lot of people that are making a great inroad into the lives of young people with specific dismissal of the Christian message because it's misinterpreted in their minds. They say the Christian message is nothing but violence, and that's because it's been interpreted incorrectly by Christian people. In today's gospel, there's a line about, if you don't believe in the Son of Man, you're already condemned. Jesus is talking to Nicodemus in John's gospel. Well, we took that particular idea, that phrase, totally out of context and justified slaughtering millions and millions of people throughout history in the name of Christ because they wouldn't be baptized or they didn't commit to Christian faith. We still do that. Hopefully not taking lives, but we certainly modeled that for the ISIS and groups like that take lives in the name of their understanding of God. So we need to have broad and deep conversations about the significance of baptism. It would be a beginning point in my mind. My life has changed. My interpretation of Christianity has changed greatly over my 75 years because I've been lucky enough to be part of conversations with people who devoted their life to reopening a conversation with the gospel text, with the Christ of faith that we find in the gospel. Those are important things. When we evolve out of this pandemic business and go back to whatever it was that we were, it's going to be drastically different. Lots of people will have found that they can get along perfectly well without life in a Catholic parish or a Christian parish. That's why I really think we should be using this time to reinvigorate ourselves, but that's not happening because we're just kind of doubling down on a few select issues and that the leadership finds to be important, and they are important, but they're part of a broad spectrum of what ought to be important in my mind in terms of the gospel. But this doubling down on a few issues and it's just going to leave young people shaking their heads and saying, why? What do I want to be part of that group for? But I really believe that we have good things to say. Tonight, our confirmation kids are coming to church to hear Terry Nelson Johnson, an incredibly gifted man who used to work and still does, I think, at Old St. Pat's in Chicago, who has devoted his life to unpacking the biblical text, the Gospels in particular, for young people. And those young people will come away, some of them, not all, will come away engaged and thriving, and hopefully they'll connect as they grow with other Christians and Catholics that keep them inspired. But it's got to be a credible, it can't be some kind of, let's return to the good old days of 1950 and pretend that I Love Lucy and Ozzie and Harriet are, real people. But anyway, peace be with you.